As mentioned in the introduction video, the problem with tactical motifs is that in a game, no one tells you that it's a critical moment where you have a winning opportunity. And that can make you miss this possibility, a possibility that you would normally detect in a puzzle book. So what is the solution? How can you spot tactical motifs? Well, I'm just about to teach you that.
And by that I mean literally every single tactical motif is based on one of three factors that I'm about to reveal to you. Number one, the king. Of course, that's the most important piece. We will always watch out for checks, possible threats of mate, or any sort of attack to the king. Number two, loose pieces. By loose pieces, I mean undefended pieces. It's not when the opponent blunders and the piece is hanging. That is of course nice as well, but this is somewhat deeper. These are undefended pieces that are not attacked at the moment. Or another kind of loose piece, I like to call them semi-loose piece, is when a piece is attacked and defended by the same number of pieces. We will see examples for this case as well, because those pieces can end up being lost as well due to combinations. Number three, unfortunately placed pieces, especially pieces that can be trapped, pieces with limited mobility, but also here in this number three scenario, we will see positions where a piece is actually active, centralized, looking like a well-placed piece, but it will end up being lost because of a pattern. So pieces that might end up being in the attack of other pieces. This is about how the pieces relate to one another. If you can observe these three factors and then see the relation between the pieces, between your pieces, between the opponent's pieces, you will discover patterns. And those patterns are the patterns that will win material and will win the game for you. Sometimes these patterns are obvious, a fork, a double attack. Other times you will need creativity and you will need to work in order to make them possible. We are going to practice how to detect these factors and how to recognize the pattern that wins the game. Are you ready for this? Some 20 examples are coming. Hope you will enjoy them all. We will start with this position where it is black to move, but hey, don't think about moves yet. Let's detect the factors that I mentioned. First of all, how about the king? Both kings. The white king, ooh, well, this rook on the b5, the queen here, it's not looking so safe. The c8 king is somewhat better, though if we give time for the opponent, queen e6 could come and our king is not the safest either. For the moment, let's say that white's king is worse, but there's no direct attack at the moment because of a defending piece that is the h3 rook. So we have a pin here and we would love to play queen a3, but this rook on h3 does not allow us. This is a relation that you must understand, how the h3 rook is defending the b1 king. Now, loose pieces. Let's go through the loose pieces of white. The g4 queen, undefended. The e1 rook, undefended. And the b2 bishop is a semi-loose piece. It is a semi-loose piece because you attack it with one piece and it's protected by one piece. If you could suddenly attack it with yet another piece, the bishop would be lost. At this stage, you can also look at pawns if you like, but this position is most likely about more than just winning a pawn. How about black's pieces? A loose piece would be also the black queen and the g8 rook. You shall keep in mind also your loose pieces because you don't want to be tricked. There can be tactical motifs against your pieces as well. Pause the video and try to find the tactical motif that wins the game here. I hope that you managed to detect a very strong move which is not 1 c3. Now this is what I talked about when you shall detect your own loose pieces. c3 is a bad move. It allows rook takes c3 check. Your queen is hanging on a4 you cannot take back. Ouch. So careful about your own loose pieces. Now the solution is another pawn move, d3. You are threatening queen takes c2, queen b2 mate, therefore white has to react to this move. He has to either take or push his pawn, protect it, but he has to do something. If he takes, now here comes the way to take advantage of the loose queen on g4. Rook takes b2 check. You sacrifice in order to bring the king to b2, and now c3 is a check. You are winning the queen on g4. To d3, the opponent realizes that his queen will be in trouble. He might try to defend by playing queen d1, but here you have another tactical motive. Remember that, first of all, the h3 rook was defending the king on b1. Now that you have played d3, you cut the connection between the rook and the pawn. So you can play queen takes a3, and after queen c1, here comes another beautiful tactical motive, c3, in order to play d2 in this position, deflecting the queen from the defense of the bishop. Here comes another example. You must detect the tactical motive that wins the game by first observing the factors that we mentioned. Please pause the video and find the win for white. Alright, I think you did a great job detecting that the g6 pawn is a weakness. It's actually a semi-loose piece. You are attacking it with the queen and only the king is protecting it. A semi-loose piece next to the king is even worse because it means that you will be attacking the king by winning this piece. How can we further increase the pressure on the g6 pawn? Well, the queen is attacking and almost the rook as well. We would need to move the bishop away in order to take on g6. Whenever you solve tactics, you might go for observing forcing moves first, which is of course a good idea, but you don't always have to go crazy. Moves like queen takes g6 are not always the solution. So yes, you can calculate such moves. Sometimes that's what makes a brilliant mating attack in books, but in real life it's normally much more simple. So we want to get rid of the bishop and then we can take on g6. How to do it? By playing bishop e6 check. It's important that this is a check. Not any bishop move works. If bishop takes d7, for instance, yes, it's a forcing move because it's a capture and the rook is hanging, but it's not forcing enough. Black has an intermediate move, knight d3 check, closing the diagonal of your queen, and then he takes your bishop. Ouch. The only move that was winning is bishop e6 check. Black takes the bishop, and now queen takes g6. King f8, and you increase the pressure further by taking on h6. If it's captured, of course you take back and then you win the queen. If black tries to protect on the 7th rank by playing rook c7, then you have another tactical motive, and now this is about unfortunately placed pieces. The queen in itself is not a bad piece, nor the rook, but the two together are in a pattern, and that pattern is the fork. You play d6, which will deflect the queen from the defense of the g7 bishop. The queen is now overloaded on e7. In the next examples, we will change the order. First we see the solution, and then we try to draw conclusions. Bishop takes h7 check, king takes, queen h3, and king g8, rook takes d5. The pawn cannot take on d5 because the queen would be hanging, and if queen takes, knight e7 is not just a fork but it's mate. So what made this sacrifice on h7 possible? Well, let me tell you what was black's last move. Bishop b7. It looks like an innocent move, but black did not realize that this move, the drawback of bishop b7 is that it leaves the queen unprotected. Bishop takes h7 is a check. That was a loose piece, a semi-loose piece, and also the d5 knight was a semi-loose piece. When you see the relation between these pieces and how you can exploit them, it makes the tactics easy to spot. Queen h3 and not queen h5. Then the king goes back to g8 and you did not achieve anything. You need a check from h3 in order to pin the pawn on e6, and now you can take on d5. We will practice this skill even further, of course. In this position, it is white to move, and I'm sure that you feel that there's something going on the f7 square with both white knights targeting this spot. You can jump there actually right now. Knight g f7 check. Since after rook takes f7, you have an intermediate move. This is a tactical tool that's called decoy. You are luring the queen to a bad square, which is the d8 square. If queen takes d8, knight f7 is a fork. Therefore, queen b8 has to be played, but this doesn't help because you will win the game anyway. What was the possibility that white spotted here? First of all, the king. Thanks to knight f7, there are double attacks in the air, and this bishop d8 was the key of the tactical motif. After rook takes f7, the rook leaves the defense of the d8 square, bishop d8 intermediate move, and the queen cannot be maintained on the 7th rank. That is his problem. He has to move away, and then you either win the queen or take all his pieces. Let's go for the next one. Black played queen b2 in this position, which is a huge mistake. And it's not a mistake because of something very direct, like knight h5 check. You might think that that's the key. No, this can be taken with the knight and it's still not mate. White is not winning material. What you need to spot is that this is a semi-loose piece. And this as well. On top of that, these pieces are connected. If the knight is attacked or pinned, then the d7 bishop will be hanging. Therefore, the key move is queen e5, pinning the knight. You are threatening to take the bishop, and now if the queen comes back, it is too late. Knight h5 check here. The knight cannot take it. It has to be g takes. Now you have queen g5 check, and after king f8, queen takes f6, and you are winning the game. Once again, the queen was the key. This queen move, leaving the d7 bishop semi-loose. In this position, black wasn't lost. After queen b2, he is, because of not understanding that his pieces will be semi-loose and end up being hanging. Now it is your turn to spot the tactical motif in the next example. It is white to move in this position. You must pause the video and find the factors that will allow a tactical motif and a victory eventually. Good job. Yes, the queen is hanging on e5, but we will not care about it much because there is a factor that's even more important, and that is called the back rank. Black could get back rank mated. All you need to do is bring a heavy piece to the 8th rank. Therefore, rook c2 is a winning move. You are threatening the queen. Of course, queen takes e5 is not an option because you will give mate. Therefore, if queen takes c2, the same situation of course, and this leads to black having to retreat from c7. Let's say queen d7 as a try. Now you give check on the back rank, and after rook e8, once again, we are in a new situation when you need to detect the factors that will make you win the game. The back rank is still a factor. Don't think that just because black played rook e8, we must forget about it. And there are loose pieces. This is a semi-loose piece, and the queen is a loose piece. Moreover, the queen is protecting the e8 rook. If you could deflect the queen, you would win the game. It's that simple. Queen c7. the queen cannot be taken because of rook e8, and there's just no way of escaping from this. The queen cannot go anywhere. Queen e7 is of course a losing move. Next one. I'm sure you can do that as well. It is black to move. Pause the video and find the winning combination. Detect first the factors that will allow a tactical motif. Okay, there is a semi-loose piece, the c3 knight, but even more importantly, the king is suffering. The long diagonal is weak and you are about to take on d5. But you don't really want to capture that with a pawn. You would prefer having your queen on d5, which leads to a tactical idea. Rook takes c3 and exchange sacrifice in order to deflect the white queen. And now queen takes d5, threatens mate on 2 squares, and a loose piece. Just note how this b5 bishop was not a loose piece in the initial position, but if you analyze the relation between the pieces, the knight is protecting the bishop, the queen is protecting the knight, and the queen is protecting the d5 pawn. On top of that, you want to play queen d5 yourself in order to threaten mate on the long diagonal. So by deflecting the queen, taking the knight, you have achieved all this at once. You're threatening mate, white has to play f3, and now you take the bishop as well. You've got 2 minor pieces and a pawn, and a very nice attacking position, so black is winning. This position will be about a loose piece and 2 not very fortunately placed pieces. Let's detect the loose piece first, the e3 bishop, and the not very fortunate pieces are also connected to this bishop. If the bishop was not on e3, these rooks could be in trouble. How to make this happen? In many cases, there will be no obvious move or no obvious tactical threat. But if you train, if you practice solving tactical puzzles, you will be able to visualize a solution even when it's not directly on the board. e5 is a very strong move. It chases away the knight from d4 and prepares for the next move, which is d5. You are threatening to take on e4, so in any case you would win a pawn if white does not take on d5. Therefore e takes d5 happened in the game, and now knight takes d5. You are threatening this loose piece. If the bishop goes to g5 to maintain this diagonal, you have f6, and if he protects it with the rook in order to make his rook less unfortunate, there's once again a tactical motive. It is not knight takes e3, because after rook takes, careful, there's no bishop h6 because the e5 pawn is hanging with a check. So how can we make this work? You need to be creative and you need to visualize a situation where rook takes e5 would not be a check. And of course I don't mean move like king f8, you don't have time for that. It has to be with a tempo, everything has to be a forcing move. e4, you threaten the rook, this pawn has to be taken, and now you take on e3, and after rook takes e3, bishop h6, there's no more check on the e file, and you are winning an exchange. Thanks to e5 and then d5. If white doesn't go for this, after e takes d5, if he sees that this will happen, he might play something else, and in that case you simply take on e4. In any case, in a practical game, winning a pawn or 2 pawns is already a huge advantage. In our next example, black played b6 and did not realize a typical tactical motive that happens often in the Sicilian, knight to d5. This is a temporary piece sacrifice. If e takes, c takes d5, and you will win back the piece and end up having a pawn up. Now, why is this possible? The move b6 creates a semi-loose piece, that is the c6 knight. Moreover, with the rook on the c file and the queen on c7, the relation between these pieces is that without the c pawn, there would be a pin on the c file. if you add these things up and see knight d5, you will easily spot that you can play this move and have a pawn up in this position and a much better position. These tactical motifs are also patterns that you can learn simply by practicing, solving puzzles, and these tactical tricks that come from openings, you can learn them when you learn the opening itself. So make sure that when you learn an opening, a new opening, pay attention to these tricky lines as well, as we learned in the chapter about openings. Now it's your turn again to spot the tactical motif. Analyze this position, see the factors that we discussed, and how could you exploit them. Pause the video and come up with a solution. Alright, it seems that black doesn't really have loose pieces. All these pieces are protecting each other, which is nice. But he's got a bigger problem, and that is called the king. If there was no rook on e8, you would be giving mate on f8. That's something to remember. On top of that, the back rank is also problematic, especially if he will have to move his king to h8. Then there would be a possibility of a back rank mate. How can we add these two things together? That we would love to eliminate the e8 rook, and also there's a back rank issue in many positions. The solution is rook a8. You are sacrificing the rook because if it's taken, then you play queen d5, double attack, queen f7, and queen takes a8. This is basically a back rank mate because the queen doesn't allow the king to escape. If after rook takes a8, queen d5, the king moves to h8 instead of queen f7, then this is the classical back rank mate. Rook a8, therefore this rook cannot be taken. What shall black do? He can try to protect it with the bishop, bishop a4. But then we have the other tactical idea that we stored in our brain when we were analyzing the situation, queen f8. And after rook takes f8, rook f8 is mate. Let's try one more attempt, h5, to give some space to the king at least. But now, in this new situation, what you see is a semi-loose piece on e8, which is pinned. Therefore, this rook doesn't attack, doesn't protect. Queen e6 is possible, and you are winning the rook. Queen f7, then it's even worse. How are you doing with the solutions? We have a few more examples. Hang on there. I'm sure that you can detect this one as well. What is the factor in this position that will allow a winning combination? This black to move. Pause the video. Alright. Seemingly, once again, there are no loose pieces, but it is a big problem that the king on g1 is kinda in trouble. There's no back rank mate, but still, queen d1 check wins, sacrificing the queen because after king f2, it's not rook f1 or any move of that kind. It is a prophylactic move. You don't want the king to escape to g3. h4, and this position is lost for white. He cannot do anything about rook f1 check. He might try. He even has a check. Rook f8, but after moving the king to c7, there are no more checks unless it's rook c8. And yeah, you can even take it with the king and then receive one more check. Who cares? This is still a mating net. White cannot escape from it. If he had tried after h4 to play at least knight d2 to protect the f1 square, rook takes d2, and you can either recreate the same situation by king g1, rook d1 check, or if king e1, now it's rook e2 check, king f1 would run into a discover check, and king d1 runs into rook d7 and rook e1 mate. The way to discover this pattern was to see that first of all that king on g1 is kinda exposed because of the back rank, and you had to see that in this position after king f2 it's not about giving checks, It's not always check, check, check that wins the game, but seeing what the opponent wants. He wants to escape. Can I prevent that escape route? Yes, certainly, by playing h4. And this, of course, only works if your king is safe. So white might have some checks, but nothing more than that. His king is in trouble, your king is fine. And moves like g3 don't help the situation. You can decide which move order, but probably I would recommend that you start with a check and then this beautiful pawn mate. In this game, black played queen takes d1, and you might think rook f takes d1 or rook c takes d1, but none of them. Never take back automatically. Never, ever. And I mean that not only in situations like this when you have a tactical possibility, but in any ordinary position. Before you take back a piece automatically, make sure that you check if you have an intermediate move, a stronger move, and then take back. Never miss a chance because of an automatic capture. Here as well, it's not about taking the queen, but rook takes c7 check. Intermediate move, and after king b8, rook c8 check. If the king takes, it's knight b6 mate, ouch. And if king a7, bishop b8, and knight b6 mate anyway. How was this possible? It's possible because the queen from d7 has just moved away, takes on d1 and expects an automatic capture. But there is a much better move, rook takes c7. To be fair with black, this position is bad no matter what. The c7 pawn is hanging and knight b6 is in the air, but queen takes d1 only made things faster. As we have seen, many positions are decided by a last move mistake, a last move by your opponent that does not realize your threat or creates a new possibility because of the consequences of his move. And that is the case in this game as well. White just doubles rooks on the d file, then he improves his queen by playing queen f4, and suddenly there's an opportunity after queen c7. Queen is a loose piece on c7, there's a pin here, and also if you see another semi-loose piece could be the f7 pawn. The bishop is attacking this pawn, and the queen, well, if you manage to deflect the knight from f6. And that's what happened in the game. Rook d7, cutting the connection between the queen and the f7 pawn, and if it's taken, you take on f7. And you win the game after rook takes d7, threatening mate and the queen. So white didn't have to do anything in this game but play normal positional chess. Rook d2, you are improving your control of the d file by doubling rooks on the d file. Then you improve your queen and be alert. That is what you must learn from all these examples. It's not about how beautiful the tactical motif is. It's about knowing when there is something happening on the board, because nobody tells you, hey, it is white to move and win. In your game, you must detect the possibility. You must feel the danger, or in this case, the opportunity that the opponent's pieces have just created. And this is what we will practice in a few more examples, and then I promise I'll let you go. It is black to move here. Let's detect the loose pieces and see how the king is doing. First of all, the king is not doing well. Couldn't castle, it's still in the middle of the board, and we will not let him castle, right? Loose pieces, the h1 rook. We could win this rook if we give a check on a1 and the king has to move, then we would win it. Not at the moment, but remember this motif. The d3 queen is a loose piece, and it's pinned. The c3 knight is pinned because of this loose piece. The c3 knight itself is a semi-loose piece. It's attacked by one piece, defended by another. And there is a pin on the e file. It's good to remember that. All these pieces of the puzzle will lead you to the solution. First of all, the obvious choice is queen a1 check, but knight d1 will not help you win material. So there's still this defense because of knight d1. You must make sure that when you give this check on a1, it will be a bad move. How to make this knight d1 a bad move with the queen on a1? Another piece would need to be hanging. And that gives us the solution, d4. You sacrifice this pawn in order to lure the queen to a bad square. Queen takes d4. If not, you win the piece. So he has to take this pawn, and now queen a1 check, and there's no more knight d1 because you take the queen. So after queen a1 check, there's no way to save the rook or the queen. And if queen d1, of course, it's obvious that the knight will drop. That's it. Now it seems simple, but it's only simple when you see the factors that decide this game. The king situation, horrible king, the loose pieces, semi-loose pieces, and other tactical motifs like the pins. Also, this pin after queen a1, check. So there's no knight d1 anymore. Make sure that you don't give a check from c1. You sacrifice the pawn on d4 in order to pin that knight and not to allow knight d1 happening. Here's another position, and there's a lot going on here. Look at the king on this long diagonal, the rook that is pinned, the other rook that depends on this pinned piece, and the h3 bishop. There's also a pin here. I could draw a few more arrows, but it's going to be a mess. So let's just get rid of them and see the position. You can pause the video and find the winning move. I'm sure that you did a good job. If you analyze which piece is defending what, then you spot that this queen is crucial in the defense, defending the f3 rook, and this bishop is crucial in defending the f1 rook. You need to cut the defense between these pieces. By playing rook g4, the queen is not protecting anymore. You are threatening bishop takes f3. And of course, if it's taken by the bishop, that allows queen takes f1 mate. So after rook g4, there's no defense. White is lost. If bishop g3, you still take on f3. And that's all. Of course, when you see this position, maybe you think first, all right, I just take this piece, it's a rook. But make sure that you try to seize the threat. Here, white would have two bishops for the rook. This is not the winning position for you. And this pin, when you see a pin like this, white is not getting away from this pin. He has no way of eliminating your bishop or moving his king away from the long diagonal. So you have time to seize the pressure, create a bigger threat than bishop takes f3 by seeing how the pieces relate to one another and then taking advantage of that. One more example, or two, and then we are done. This position requires a deep understanding of the factors that might decide the game. First of all, a semi-loose queen on a6, a semi-loose bishop. And if you have a good enough visualization, you might realize that there can be background problems too. If there's no f8 rook, rook e8 would be mate. Knowing all this can lead you to the solution, which is a very pretty move. Bishop to c6. What's this move about? If it's taken, then you have queen takes f8. This move was not possible with the queen on d6, so suddenly you are giving mate. If the queen is taken instead on a3, now you take back with the rook, and both the bishop and the rook on d7 are hanging. You are winning a piece. So basically, after bishop c6, there's no defense because this is a forcing move in itself. It is attacking the rook, and the bishop is hanging too. The rook has to be protecting the queen. There's no rook c7. So rook d8 has to be played, and then you take the bishop on a6. Once again, it's all possible thanks to seeing the semi-loose pieces, the queen on d6, the bishop on a6, and that in a future scenario with no rook on f8, there would be a back rank mate. The next example is quite simple if you understand the factors that rule this position. b4 was the last move of the opponent, and it's actually a bad move. It does not care about the loose rook on b1, a semi-loose piece on d5, and a c4 loose pawn. In a practical game, you want to be looking at pawns as well. In situations like this where white's king is totally safe, winning a pawn would be an achievement. And if you have put all these pieces together and see that you have a rook on the b file, it's quite simple to spot knight a5. Simply attacking the loose pawn, the knight cannot be captured because of the pin, and if white plays queen c2, you can take this pawn, and after queen takes c4, you have just won a pawn. There's no defense after knight takes c4. Knight takes e7 doesn't help because you simply take back and your knight is protected. It's a pawn up and you've got all these active pieces. Once again, it's simple to spot it once you understand which pieces of the opponent are loose or semi-loose and how is his king doing. But here the king was not a factor. The pieces on the queen side were a factor. Let's finish our tactics solving session on a high note by mating the opponent's king. You see that the king is in the middle of the board, the black king on e8, and this is what we have studied in the previous chapters: how to create a successful attack and how to attack the opponent's king when it's castled or, in this case, uncastled. So if you have paid attention, I'm sure you know how to win this position. First, f6. We chase away this bishop from e7 in order to weaken the d6 pawn. And also because it's nice to have a pawn on f6, taking so much space away from the opponent. Now that we have weakened the pawn on d6, it's time to attack it with another forcing move, knight b5. Yes, we are sacrificing a piece. Sometimes happens. Knight takes b5, a second knight arrives. Now this cannot be eliminated. It doesn't matter where the queen goes, you will take on d6 with a check, and the king has to step onto the d file, and now knight takes f7, wins the game. Discover check, everything is hanging and the king is still in trouble. In the initial position, it didn't seem like black was going to lose so quickly. Yes, his king is in the middle of the board, but you don't really have an access to it. That's why f6 is such an important move. It was taken, of course, you take back with the pawn, chase away the bishop, and now get to the d6 square. Even if it takes a piece sacrifice, it is worth it. Let's sum up all that we have learned from these examples. The king, loose pieces, and unfortunately placed pieces are the three factors that make every single tactical motif possible. Watch out for them and see how they relate to one another, and that will help you discover patterns. Discovered attacks, double attacks, pins, X-ray attacks, and so on and so on. All those tactical motifs are possible thanks to these factors. Solve tactics regularly. And I mean regularly, think of this as a muscle. If you don't do any exercise for 2 months, then going to the gym for 24 hours the next day won't help. And it's the same about tactics. Your tactic skills, your combinations, the tactical vision will not work if you don't practice. You must often solve tactical puzzles. It's much better to solve a few tactical puzzles a day than not solve any for months. You can take a book, use a website, an application. The examples that we have seen were mainly from the Chess24 Tactics Trainer, but you can use any resource. The only thing is that you must pick one and use it every day or at least a couple of days a week. And I challenge you to train your eyes to detect these factors. You know that I don't care if you can solve a puzzle in 2 seconds or it takes you 2 minutes. Honestly, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you understand why that tactical motif works. So when you see a puzzle, I don't want you to start looking for forcing moves immediately and calculate it and say, yeah, I know the win. Practice detecting the factors. King, loose pieces, semi-loose pieces, and unfortunately placed pieces. Practice it whenever you see a tactical puzzle. It's going to take you some more seconds, a minute, to see all the details of the position. But if you practice when you are solving puzzles, it will be a lot easier to detect it in your games. And that is what you should care about, being able to spot the opportunity when it's presented in a game. And you can only do that if you practice consciously how to detect these factors. Practice it with puzzles and win your games. The stronger you become tactically, the better your intuition will be. And that is what helps when you need to spot these ideas. You will be faster and you will spot these ideas easier, even in blitz and bullet games, if you practice when you solve puzzles. What I want you to achieve is that you never, ever miss a winning opportunity again. In the next chapter, we will discuss how not to blunder, because you will spot the winning ideas when it's presented, but you also must make sure that you do not commit any serious mistakes.
I hope you have enjoyed this sample from the Rudolf method, an exclusive training course I developed for club players who are determined to improve their chess but somehow cannot get past a certain level. If you want to find out more about my methodology, click on the link here or in the description below.